Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 54th episode of Stories of Service, ordinary people who do extraordinary work. And I am the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. And I'm coming to you today from beautiful Columbus, Ohio. And thanks to a girlfriend of mine, I got some fast Wi-Fi. And I'm here today with my very good friend, Dr. John Cordle. John, how you doing?
All right, great. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just great. And for those of you who came in right at 7:30 p.m., thanks for joining us. Sorry we got a little late, but not too late for y'all. I'm going to start off by reading Dr. Cordle's bio, and then we're just going to get right into some questions. We have some amazing subjects we're going to be talking tonight, a lot about crew fatigue, manning issues in the military, diversity and mental health, and of course, leadership. So I'm start off by just giving you guys a little bit of information about John Cordle. He currently serves as the principal advisor to the commander, Navy Surface Forces Atlantic for human factors and human systems integration matters. And we're going to discuss what all that means. He is a subject matter expert in crew endurance, surface ship safety, and the use of Circadian Watch Rotations to improve operational performance. He was recognized with the 2019 American Society of Naval Engineers Solberg Award for Naval Research Impact. He was recognized as USNI Proceedings Author of the Year and Surface Navy Literary Award in 2018. He's displayed unparalleled leadership and technical expert experience, including Chief of Staff for Commander Navy Surface Forces Atlantic, 2 tours in command of a Navy AEGIS warships, and 2 new construction nuclear aircraft carriers. He was awarded the 2010 Navy League John Paul Jones Award for Inspirational Leadership and BUMED Epictetus Award for his innovative 3/9 watchbill, which we'll be talking about that, endorsed by the Navy Safety Center while in major command of the USS San Jacinto. Additionally, he was recognized with Surface Navy Association Literary Award for 2013 for an article co-authored with Dr. Nita Shattuck, A Sea Change in Standing Watch. Lastly, he received the Admiral Bulkeley Leadership Award for Excellence in Command of the U.S. Oscar Austin. Welcome.
That's what you just said. He's old.
Well, I was doing my best to pronounce some of that stuff there. So if I said a mispronunciation, please feel free to correct me. You guys are the audience, but man.
Good deal. Hey, thanks a lot, Teresa. I appreciate it. Yeah, the only thing I would add to that to sort of rephrase that a little bit is, I'm a Navy brat. My dad was in the Navy for 30 years. He retired when I was 12. I joined at 18, so I've only been out of the Navy for 6 of my 60 years in some capacity. But I never went to the Pentagon. I never served a joint tour. All I've done is ships and sailors. So that's what I was going to talk about tonight. I'm not going to solve the Taiwan crisis or the shipbuilding plan, but I'll stick to what I think I know something about, which is ships and sailors.
Yeah, and I think that's the heart and soul of the Navy. Navy is ships and sailors. So
absolutely.
It's amazing to have somebody of your background. So I always start off asking all my guests with a military background, what was it that inspired you to live a life of naval service? Well,
I certainly have to say my dad, although I'll also say there was a bit of inertia there in that I was 18, living in Rome, Georgia, lead singer in a rock band and having straight A's, but also not sure what I want to do with my life. And my dad said, all right, son, you're 18. I'm not paying for college. You're not living in the basement. So here's an application to the Naval Academy and the Georgia Tech ROTC, neither of which I'd ever visited before. And filled them out, mailed them in, and got picked up for both. And I think my motivation was, how can I get out of Rome, Georgia? Or just out of, do something different, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so I went to the Naval Academy, went nuclear surface, and just fell in love with sailors and with the ships and the sea. So that's what brought me in. But it was my dad, I think, that really set the course.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of our parenting and our upbringing plays into where, what we end up doing with our lives and where life takes us and what we end up doing. It's amazing how that works. And your path to become a surface warfare officer, you could have done anything out of the Naval Academy. You could have, flown aircraft, or been in subsurface warfare, or anything really, even some of the restricted lines. What made you decide to go, I want to be a surface warfare officer?
I kind of think I wanted to. That's what my dad did. He was on aircraft carriers, destroyers, oilers, served in Vietnam. But there's a couple things I don't like. I don't like speed. I don't like altitude, and I don't like being underwater. So that pretty much ruled out aviation and submarines. And
Right.
you go through that midshipman week where you try out all that stuff. And I threw up in the airplane. And I kind of freaked out underwater. So it was going to be surface warfare all the way. And then the nukes kind of came after me and said, hey, in 30 years, America's going to be running on nuclear power. So if you sign up now, you'll be set up when you retire. That didn't pan out. But I think the nuke world did two things for me. It taught me a little more rigor in how to approach problem solving. And it really exposed me to the technical engineering side of things that really helped me out when I shifted back to the other side of the Navy on the surface warfare side. So that was kind of the surface nuke thing. And they paid a little better too, so that never hurts.
No, not at all. And you've done something that so few people in this world have done, which is command warships. And you not only commanded destroyers, you've had major command of a warship. Can you explain to the audience that doesn't really understand, like maybe someone that doesn't have a surface warfare background, sort of how the Navy grooms their surface warfare officers to take command of a ship, and then they up the ante, and then you take major command of a larger ship?
Sure. Well, it's a fairly typical progression. I mean, the Navy's all about ships, and to get the ships underway, you have to have sailors and captains. And so basically, you work your way up through the ranks as a middle level manager, sort of department head, division officer. There's selection boards for each path, both for pay grade and for the different jobs. And then you move into an executive officer position, and then command at sea is typically as an 05 is maybe at the 15 to 17 year point. And then typically a squadron has 6 folks in it that are in that position. And then there's a selection process. And I guess historically, I don't know the exact numbers, but about maybe a third to a half move on to major command. And so I was fortunate enough, to not mess up. I messed up quite a bit, but not enough to get fired. And then got to do it again. And the good thing is the second time around, you've learned some lessons, and you've maybe matured a little bit. And a little less concerned about your own performance and more about the crew's performance, I think. So it was an honor, and it really is the best job, not just in the Navy, but I think in the whole world.
What do you think was your biggest takeaway, like your biggest lesson learned from your I don't want to say smaller. And so just so people know the scope, right? How many sailors were you in charge of on your first command versus your major command?
Right. Well, it's about the same, although when we get to the manning part,
Mm-hmm.
I have a story to tell on that. But about 300 to 350 sailors on both ships, a little more on the cruiser nowadays. Back then, that wasn't the case, but the warfare areas are different. So as a destroyer, you're typically kind of multi-mission, working for an 06. As the 06, you're one of the warfare commanders for a strike group, and so it's more about the responsibility for sort of fighting the ship in a broader, more carrier strike group environment as a major commander.
And then you took your major command. You had your shore duty jobs in between. Tell us a little bit about how you made that transition from naval service to getting into and studying where you are today. And then that's where we're going to take some of the conversation with some of the things that I know we'd like to discuss.
Okay. No, hey, that's a great question, because I sometimes ask myself, how the heck did I end up here? Because it's not a likely spot for somebody.
No, it's not.
Right. So, one of the things that I'll talk a little bit about is, you have a trajectory of your life, right? And there's certain people that set that course. You talked about parents, teachers, coaches. Your spouse probably has an influence there. But then there's other people, and there's 3 people that I'm going to talk about tonight that sort of bumped me off the course that I thought I was on. And the first was Dr. Shattuck. So I met her in 2010. We did this Circadian Watch Rotation experiment on Sanjak that I'll talk about. And it was the most significant change that I had seen in 20 years in the way to run a ship. And it was all about acknowledging the science of a circadian cycle, where you sleep at the same time, work at the same time, which we all know to be kind of true. But the Navy just threw that out the window and did these crazy rotating watch stations, 5 on, 10 off, I used to shift work as a nuke with, 7 days of shift work, 12 hours a day. And I was just tired all the time. And a lot of people were that way and are that way. And so Dr. Shattuck basically built this experiment. The results were phenomenal. I came back from that, and we won that safety award and all that stuff. And I'm like, man, we're going to change the world, right? And then I ran smack into institutional resistance, which is we've never done it that way. Let's study the problem some more. We're not going to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
So I sort of, even to the point of being told to stop talking about it at one point because it wasn't Navy policy. And so at the end of the day, it became sort of a cause, right? You talk about being a crusader. I'll talk about that word in a minute. But Dr. Shattuck, myself, a couple other folks, Leanne Braddock, who ran the operational stress control, we sort of called ourselves the Crew Endurance Team and set about putting together some a website, sort of a body of knowledge, and sort of pushing this policy. Hey, Teresa, I just want to check. Are you still there? Your picture.
Oh, I'm still there. I wanted to put you on full screen just to kind of give you the floor. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can. Okay. Oh gosh.
I should have told you I was doing that, but I like to do that when.
Right.
Well, you're bringing up such a great point about how you knew this in 2010. Where were you at the time when this happened? When you did the study?
I was in command of San Jacinto. So we came back. We wrote a message about it. The message won the annual safety award. It won that leadership award. All that stuff. But that wasn't enough to get the Navy to really embrace it. The submarine force did in 2015. They went to a Circadian watch, but Surface Force kind of kept it in the good idea box as a best practice until 2017, when those two collisions happened and 17 sailors died. And if you read the comprehensive review, the word fatigue is kind of written all over the place in there. Sure. And so immediately the Navy adopted that policy that we had been talking about for 7 years at the time. And so that became the law. And so what's kind of cool now, 5 years later, by the way, we're at that interim. We're 5 years from between the Fitzgerald collision and the McCain collision. And so you think about that and all the things that have happened since then, one of which is the creation of my current position, but also the change. So I was on a ship the other day talking to a couple of officers, a division officer, probably 24 years old, and a department head, probably in late 20s. And the department head was talking about how they had stood these other watches and how much better the circadian watches are. And the young division officer piped up and said, well, that's all I've ever known. And so I thought that was kind of a pretty cool moment there, that today's generation doesn't know what other folks put up with back in the day, But
it's because of people like you who took this cause on and realized how important it was that people sleep at the same time and get up around the same time. And something that's always baffled my mind was the idea that, in the NATOPS, which they say is, written in blood for the aviators because of all the different mistakes and mishaps and things that have happened. Crew rest is mandatory. Like after they fly, they have to have time to sleep. Do you know why the Surface Navy has never adopted, especially for OODs, anybody that really stands watch on the bridge or in engineering or combat? Those are the three places that we stand the most dangerous watches. And I'm just curious, do you know why the Surface Navy has never adopted something similar?
Well, I think the first I talked about just resistance, right? The Navy's steeped in tradition, and to change it really takes a big push. I think there's a little bit of a difference on if you're supposed to fly a plane and you don't meet the crew rest, then you don't fly the plane, right? And because there's other backups, that either you don't fly the mission, somebody else flies the mission, you delay it. On the surface ship, if you're supposed to take the watch, there's nobody else, it's you, right? And so I think there was a feeling that we just can't comply with that policy because there's no backup plan. And the other thing, we'll talk about manning here later, is for the pilots, it's a one of, but there's the whole team. But at the end of the day, I think it just sort of went in the, there's a couple things. One, it was kind of in the too hard pile, right? It's just too hard, so we're not going to do it. Part of it was, hey, like I see this a lot with folks in my generation, and I think it always happens is, hey, I'm pretty smart. I didn't think of that, and so, it's probably not going to work. So it was a lot of resistance, not resistance, but reluctance, I guess, to just, take that step to mandate it. And again, even now today, it's tough. It's a personal. We'll talk about personal responsibility here in a little bit on the whole sleep discussion. But being tired is like being drunk, and you would not take the watch drunk, and so you shouldn't take the watch tired. So if you get past all the policy and procedures, at the end of the day, it's about the watch standard taking ownership for their personal readiness, and that's the piece I think we have to crack. And that's where pilots are great. My friend that flies for American Airlines, or one of the big airlines, he calls up an 800 number and says, either I'm ready to fly the plane or I'm not. And if he says I'm not, then they get him a hotel room and they find somebody else to fly the plane, right? No attribution, nothing like that. So, for me, Nirvana is the day when that officer of the deck walks up and says, Captain, I can't take the watch because I'm too tired, because I was up all night looking at charts or fixing my gear or watching Top Gun or whatever. But I'm not ready to take the watch. The other thing is, when you get tired, the first thing you lose, like when you're drunk, is your judgment. And so I often hear, even especially young people, say, "Well, I've worked tired all the time, and I was okay." But that doesn't mean that you should.
Right. And again, we had a couple of people who are participating in the conversation. My buddy John, he was just like, the way medical interns are treated is the same way with the 72-hour shifts.
Yes, sir. Yep. John Dittmer, an old Naval Academy classmate, legit mate of mine. No, you're right. It's funny that the medical, some of the places you can least afford to be tired are the places that tire people out the most. Firefighters, police, they stand some crazy schedules. I was on a podcast with a guy named Jim Gearing, talks a lot about firefighters and first responders, and he's fighting that. Unlike the Navy, though, there is no central organization to push something like that on the nation's firefighters. It's all, state driven, city driven. So it has to be a culture change based on the science.
It does. And, I never thought about that, John, about the fact that this is something that impacts first responders in all fields, not just the Navy.
Right. I mean, I don't want the guy or the gal driving my ship to be dead tired. I also don't want the guy or gal taking my appendix out to be dead tired. They might leave some sponge in there or something. So, but it's across, and I think that's the other thing that's going on, I think, is I see a lot more talk about sleep across, LinkedIn and other forums. I think people are starting to recognize the ties between sleep, the short-term performance of sleep, the midterm, mood, anxiety, insomnia, stuff like that, and the long-term effects of diabetes, sleep apnea, even cancer, so and that's another piece of this. I think we as leaders, we kind of have a responsibility to our sailors not to just burn them out and throw them away. I mean, they have a life after the military where they stay in for 5 years or 30, and it's not appropriate to just kind of tell them, hey, just suck it up for a couple of years and then deal with the aftermath once you get out of the Navy. So there's that piece of the puzzle too.
Yeah, it's so true, and and you're really broadening the way I see this issue. And I've gone through periods myself where I can attribute. I mean, I even had a psychotic episode, and I attribute a lot of that episode to the lack of sleep I had during that week that the episode occurred. So it's a scary thing, lack of sleep. I know there's something to what you're saying, and I don't think that it's you're like you say, it's getting more attention, but I still think to this day there's not enough awareness about that. And to Sandy's point, she wrote in the comments, she just said it seems like a point of pride to say, well, I stayed up for 3 days, and there really is that culture in certain jobs.
Yep, being tired is a badge of courage or something to be proud of, and SWOs argue about that all the time. I've been up for 5 days. Oh yeah, I was up for 6.
Right.
Well, hey, you're an idiot, right? So that's culture, and I think we're getting there. I think our leadership is certainly engaged in that conversation, and is at a point where on most ships, if you said, "Hey, we need to not do this because we're all tired," that will fly now. I think more than it would have 5 years ago. Certainly,
I agree.
So, I want to something real quick. I was just, I'm a big fan of Proceedings magazine, by the way, if you haven't figured that out. But sometimes I want to read you something from a junior sailor. This is Petty Officer 3rd Class Sahia Nanez. The more undermanned a rating is, the more hours must be covered by a repeating loop of other sailors, resulting in hours of lost sleep and a serious effect on sailors' mental health. So, there's an E5 telling us what we all know. And so we should listen to, or him.
We should.
I can't for her,
yeah.
But right. So I thought that was a well-written sentence that really sort of sums up what we're talking about.
And kind of transitioning from the sleep to some of the issues with manning in the military, at least within the surface force that I know you know very well. Do you think that there's also ways that we can be more creative with our manning, or ways we can, I mean, there's always that feeling among so many of us that we're just trying to do more with less, and
Right.
when it comes to manning. And so what are some of your thoughts on that issue?
Well, it's there's always going to be a challenge with manning because you have to get the right people in, you have to train them up, get them there, keep them in, right? But one of the challenges is, and we face this all the time in the Navy, is you make choices. And so we have a group down in I think they're in New Orleans, NAVMAC, that does calculations and tells us based on the science exactly how many people it takes to run a ship and what pay grade. Unfortunately, we've historically not bought those number of people, so maybe 90%, and then because of other things, they call it friction, right? So things like injuries or illness or schools or travel, we don't man the ships to that number. We have to take a smaller number, like 92, 95% of that. And so if you do that math, you're down to about a 90, 85%, manning level across the force. And then we start moving people around to get the ships that are out there in harm's way fully manned. And that creates churn because, take sailor A from ship, to another ship. Now you've broken the team apart. You've wrenched their life up. They're not maybe trained up. And so that induces stress into the equation. And it's all about risk. And so, when the ships collided over in the Pacific, it was recognized that we had accumulated risk that we didn't recognize, right, in manpower and in gaps, and key gaps like the Fitzgerald with no quartermaster on board for a long time, no chief, right? So if you're missing a chief, you're missing all sorts of stuff: the training, the mentorship, the maintenance, all. And then so we said, hey, we're gonna take risk in the maintenance phase, and we're gonna shove those people from the maintenance ships out to the deployed ships. And then we burned up a couple of ships, the Oscar Austin and the Bon Armour Shard. And so that risk just moved to another part of the Navy, and it bit us again, And so, back to the, that sentence from the young sailor there, if we would man the ships to the proper requirement, a lot of these problems would solve themselves. Even though that's not perfect, it's still a step in the right direction.
Would that take Congress putting money in a different pot? Like, what would that really take for us to say this is important enough for us to now follow these scientific studies of how many people need to be manning these ships?
I don't think it would take more money. It would take a reprioritization of the money we have. You look at the CNO's sailing orders navigation plan. The first word up there is sailors. And, the way I kind of look at it is, when my paycheck comes every month, the first thing I do is pay my mortgage, right? I don't pay 90% of my mortgage. I don't pay 92% of my mortgage. I pay my mortgage because that's the most important thing, the house around my family. And so we'd give that money up somewhere else. There was a flag officer testifying before Congress a few years ago. That said something like, to really man the fleet with 100%, we'd have to buy 125%. And that's not worth it. I kind of respectfully disagree with both of those statements. It's more like 115%. And maybe it is worth it. Maybe you need to buy a few more people than that requirement to account for the fact that they're human, and, people break or they take time off or whatever. And so you have to have some friction, fudge factor, or whatever, to keep the right people in place. And it's complicated. I'm not going to say it's simple, but if you set a goal that's less than 100%, then you're never going to get to 100%, right?
Correct. Yeah. No, that's a great point, John. I wonder too, like you say, it's a reprioritization. There's going to be always people that have their sacred cows, and we're so entrenched in spending lots of money for lots of things that, like our computers, for example, that don't work very well, and still spend lots of money on those accounts. And so I think that you're fighting this entrenched bureaucracy of people that want to hoard whatever manning and programs. Then we have a lot of staff jobs that are maybe duplicative or redundant, but people
Right.
don't want to face that they're duplicative or redundant. And so, again, I think that I can't see the name, but LinkedIn user brought up a great point that I'm kind of getting at too, which is at what point do COs stand up and say, we can't do the mission? My life experience says they won't do it. Look at, and I don't know what he means by, you might know this, what BA versus NMP. What does he mean by that?
So NMP is basically what the Navy says, that's that requirement, right? That's that 100% requirement. And then what they say is you're going to get a basic allowance, which is what we fund out of that requirement, which is like 90%. And there's another, I forget the name of it, but there's another one, which is your fair share, which is, okay, we funded this much, but we don't have them out in the fleet. So we're going to divvy what we have up amongst all the ships. And that settles out, monkey math around 90%. So the question, when will the see up, so you asked me before, what did I learn between my 05 and my 06 command? And I think what I learned was to say no. And that's where I still think that, an 05 coming into command right now, I was scared to death, right? I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I'd never done that before. And so I didn't know what my boundaries were. And part of it was you're sort of pushed to be, to do the best, right? You have competition between, you're supposed to be a team, and yet you get ranked against each other. And you know that if you're not the number 1 or 2 guy, you're not going to go on to the next level. And so sometimes that becomes a driver to push the crew beyond their limits. And I did that a couple of times in 05 command. I'm not proud of it. And so I take command of San Jacinto, and I got a call from the staff, right? My dad used to say a staff is like a tree full of monkeys, right? Have you heard that before?
No.
From the top down, it's a bunch of smiles. From the bottom up, it's just a bunch of assholes. Sorry.
Oh gosh.
You have to bleep that.
No, I've checked. You can cuss.
My dad was a Mustang, so yeah, the staff guy called me up and said, "Hey, John, your ship hasn't towed another vessel in 2 years, and you're way overdue because of operational stuff. So we're going to get you underway on Monday. You're going to get underway, and you're going to tow the Anzio in an exercise." And I said, I haven't been on this ship ever underway. I don't know the crew. I've never been on this class of ship. I'm not doing it. And he's like, "What do you mean you're not doing it?" And I said, "I'm not going to get underway and tow another ship. It's too dangerous." And he goes, "Well, you'll have to call the admiral and tell him that." I said, "Okay, what's his phone number?" And I called him, and he said, "Okay, get your feet under you, and then when it's time to go." So I think COs don't ask because they think they're going to be told to pack sand. I think that's different now. I think if they tried, I think they would find that most leaders will accept that. If you go back to this, I keep this book on my desk. I don't know if you can see it, the Comprehensive Review.
Yep, I can see it.
I go back and read that all the time. And one of the things in there is the can-do attitude that helped us kill those sailors. Is we're just going to power through it and get the job done, no matter how bad we feel about the decisions we're making. And so that's the culture that we need to change. And I think we've come a long way. I honestly do. But one of my old mentors said some of these culture changes take a generation, which is about 10 years. And so we're 5 years in after the CR, so we're halfway there. But the first time you see a commanding officer stand up and say no, the peers will look and see what happens, right? And so that's easy for me to say. I had a couple times when I could have and should have and didn't. So, but again, I've learned along the way. And so that's one of the reasons I came on here, is to kind of share some of my mistakes so people can think about it and maybe not do the same thing I did, Well,
to put it at even at a strategic level, this is the conversation that I had with Stu Scheller, which is, when they did the withdrawal from Afghanistan, what would have happened if the CENTCOM commander or Joint Chiefs of Staff or somebody had said, "No, we're not withdrawing. I'm not putting my troops in harm's way. I'm not putting them at the airport at this time. I'm not gonna do it." I mean, maybe they would have just fired those guys and gotten rid of them and got new guys that would have done it, but we don't know. We don't know.
And I would also submit that the higher you get, the harder it is to say no, because the person you're saying no to has their reasons, right? And so I think it's definitely a tough decision. And then what does saying no mean? Does no mean I'm not going to do it at all? Does no mean I'm not going to do it today? I'm going to wait till tomorrow. And so we kind of say that in almost a casual way, but what does no mean? And if I was going to tell my boss no, I would also say, now here's what I need to get to yes, right? You give me a couple more people, you give me 2 weeks,
Right.
So that's not the end of the conversation. You're never going to win a war if everybody says no, you know.
Correct.
And so there's a balance there, I think. I don't want to trivialize it, but it's important.
No, it is important, and it's an important conversation to have. And
Right.
I think that part of what makes a crew, other than having the right manning and the right amount of sleep, is an environment where people feel welcome and they feel part of the team.
Right.
And there's been so much talk in the Navy about, or in the military as general, about diversity and inclusion. And it's almost become a bad buzzword, which is unfortunate. And in my
Right.
opinion, we'll talk about why. Because there
Okay.
seems to be this clash between the people who think this is all woke and then the people who want to keep these initiatives going and think that these are really good things. And I'm wondering if you can talk to that a little bit and sort of bridge that gap.
Sure. So, it's funny. One of my friends kind of piped in up LinkedIn to one of my posts and said, "Hey, John, I don't recall you being such a DEI crusader back in the day, right? When we were serving together." And
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of took offense at that. Although I kind of like the name, I kind of like that call sign now. But at the end of the day, I'm different, right? So who made me different? We talked about trajectories. Hopefully he's on the call. If he could make it, Keith Green wrote the book Black Officer, White Navy. I
Yeah,
met him through a LinkedIn post where somebody jumped on him for espousing, that there might actually be,
a problem with
race issues
racism.
in the
Yeah,
military. And someone of my demographic piped up and said, "Well, I just don't see it, right?" And I think you're basically insulted Keith. And I typed in, "Well, hey, just so you know, dude, I'm blocking you. But before I do, I want to tell you why." And I blocked that gentleman, and then Keith responded, and then we became friends. And he sent me his book, Black Officer, White Navy, which I would highly recommend. If you read one book this year, pick that up.
I
Um,
agree.
and it's like a punch in the gut because you realize how many things that people go through um, that other people don't have to deal with, whether it's
Right.
because black or female or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's a different life, and it's a different life. I grew up in Rome, Georgia. I drove my little Nash Rambler station wagon with a Confederate flag license plate through the poorest part of town to an all-white high school. I mean, I pulled my yearbook out the other day. There's like one black person at my high school. So I just didn't know. I didn't think about it because I didn't have to think about it. And so Keith sort of got me reading about things like the John C. Stennis, um, which is named for a segregationalist, which is kind of a nice word for a racist, right? You just go to Wikipedia and look at the guy's history. He did some great stuff for the Navy, but oh, by the way, he wasn't very much of a friend of black people, and
Right.
so why do we still have a ship named after him, And so respect, right? We talk about the workplace and workplace respect. We have studies that show that you as a woman in the Navy have a 24% chance of being sexually harassed this year. 1 in 4, right? Um, Minorities have a 1 in 3 chance of being discriminated against in some way in their workplace. At least that's what they tell the auditors. And then the next line says, by the way, we think this is underreported because people don't trust the system. And so, holy cow. And then we talk about adding respect to the core values, which was one of the recommendations from Task Force One Navy. And then we don't do it, And so we have opportunities, I think, now to really embrace this conversation. But back to your point about this concept of, is this something that we're giving up to do warfighting readiness, right? Well, if I'm on the fire team or the watch team, and the person next to me somehow has communicated that they think they're better than me because I'm different, we're not an effective team, right?
Right.
And I want that team, I want the guy next to me or gal next to me to be pulling on the oars the same way I am. And if I just insulted them because of their race, color, they were pregnant or they have a beard, right? Because I have a medical condition. That's what they're going to remember about me. And that's
Yes.
not respect, right? And so I think if we changed the core values, added respect, that would spur a lot of conversations, right? And then you look at some of the policies we have. I'm sure as a woman, you've had issues with the Navy's pregnancy policies, with hair policies, with uniforms,
I have.
right? Talked about some of that stuff.
I
Well,
mean, I have very thick, very, hard to manage hair. And it's silly. It's a silly thing, but a hair headache just from having to put it back into a bun. And I know it's something small, but why is there the Air Force, you're allowed to have this much hair on your ponytail, but in the Navy, it can only be this much. And you got to, it's just these very, very
torture yourself, inflict pain upon yourself. But and that's why, if you read the stuff that I've published, one of the things that Keith turned me on to was this whole idea of this concept of PFB, that this is a medical condition, that the only cure is to grow a beard. And yet we have these policies that make people go back to medical, shave. And then, when you talk to leaders, they have this misperception that, they just need to shave. They just learn to shave better, or they need to use these creams like Nair on your face, or get laser removal, hair removal, which is like one of my friends said, it's like having a rubber band thumped on your face like 10,000 times, right? And then, oh, by the way, you might be discolored, or you might have. So, just let everybody grow a beard. Where's the danger in that? 2/3 of the Navy is on shore duty. So you have this discussion about gas masks. Well, who cares? If I'm in the Pentagon, I'm not going to don an SCBA to put the fire out. I'm going to run for the door, right? If headquarters catches fire at S.O.S, then I'm going to run out into the parking lot. So nothing bad will happen if we change that policy. In fact, I think if we change that policy, 3 good things will happen. We'll save all the time we spend on medical visits, which is about $5 million a year, and about 30,000 man hours standing in line for medical appointments to get their beards looked at. We will, though, all that time can be spent on maintenance and parts and stuff, right? Fit reps and evals would see an uptick for African American sailors or white sailors that have a beard. I have a friend, a white person with a skin condition.
I do too.
He reported to the staff, and on his first week at the staff, he was stopped in the P-way 9 times by staff members, from captains to chiefs, and taken the task about his facial hair. And what he said to me was, every interaction like that ruined the rest of my entire day, right? And so I learned this word called microaggressions from Keith that I had never heard before, right? And so those are things that I think, we just have to listen. If any of us sit down with someone who has PFB and ask them to tell me a story where your career has been negatively impacted by this condition, every single person has a story like that. We got to listen to them, so that whole, woke or whatever else. If you're a leader and you're not listening to your people and not figuring out what drives them, what motivates them. And then, I had someone say, well, the military is not about you, it's about being part of the team. Well, okay. But we're all individuals at the end of the day, and something motivates us, and something shuts us down. And I want to get past that. I want to remove those barriers for the team. So that's what the diversity conversation is about. And I think, the more that we look like the population out there, the better we can serve that population, if you ask me.
That's a great way to put it too, because when we see, especially like me as a woman, I've always taken the jobs, like you, I haven't gone to the Pentagon, and I enjoy the tactical jobs. I'm not much for the high level staffs, and I like to be where the Navy's making things happen. And that's usually on deployments and on travel too. And being on travel, the gender disparity is even more.
Really?
And oh yeah, especially, and as you climb in the ranks. So as I go up in ranks, or as I have, like my job at Joint Enabling Capabilities Command, my last job, where we were working with COCOMs and helping them stand up joint task forces, I would be sometimes the only woman on the what we call the MTP, mission training exercise, and so it creates a dynamic where you're all by yourself if you really want to have like a consistent liberty buddy, or someone to hang out with all the time, because the men naturally buddy with the men, because that's appropriate.
Right.
And then you're just kind of like by yourself. And that's where a lot of my loneliness has come from. It's just not having anybody. And
they're afraid to buddy with you because they feel like somebody will think you're, doing something inappropriate or something. Wow.
Absolutely.
Well, now you know how I felt at Women's Leadership Symposium, right? As 10 guys among 1,000 ladies. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that, Teresa. That's interesting.
Yeah, I wrote Brad about that from the male allies, Brad Johnson, and
Okay.
I'm hoping to hear back from him on that point, because I actually sent him a video called "Men and Women Can't Be Friends" from very controversial conservative commentator Matt Walsh, and it's
Okay.
fascinating because basically Steve Harvey did this video about it, about
Yep.
really where he says he has no women friends, and everybody jumped on him, but Matt Walsh put it really well. I mean, there is just a dynamic about men and women together alone, that there is going to be a perception. And usually men and women can only be alone together for long periods of time if it's mediated by somebody. Like, in other words, if there's a group thing that you're doing together. So what that does is it doesn't build intimacy. And so women who crave intimacy and connection, just like men do, we're kind of just SOL when we go on travel if we're in the
Right.
most senior ranks. And no one talks about this.
Right. Ship where you have only, you have limited female berthing.
Mhm.
I notice we have ships out there right now that don't have any female enlisted on board because of the way that they're configured, even today. So,
Yeah.
so who do they have to mentor? Wow, that's pretty wild. But again, there's an example of something that I never had to think about, right?
Right.
And yet that's impacting the folks that work for me or work with me. And if you don't talk about it, I think you're doing them and you a disservice. So that's a great point. Um, so yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's interesting.
No, I appreciate you listening to that. And to be honest with you, like, that's why Jules is so important. And just for the audience to know, John wrote this amazing article about a symposium that we have every year called the Joint Women's Leadership Symposium, and is the largest gathering of women in uniform. But of course, men are welcome, and we want men to be there. But it's an amazing event because all of a sudden you're seeing people that are of your same rank or higher, some higher. And you're like, oh yeah, it just inspires you. It makes me want to keep serving. And when I don't get any of that for long periods of time, because I'm always in deploying jobs where, I'm the token woman, sometimes I get discouraged. But then I go to something like that and I'm around like these amazing rock stars like Admiral Franchetti. And I'm like, oh, this is what it's like to be around women like this. And so that's why mentorship is so important. And that's why diversity and inclusion initiatives are something that we really have to focus on in the military as a priority.
No, thanks. Yeah, that article just coincidentally posted today, and really all I did was there was some app where you can write questions, and I had the app, and I realized at the end of the day that all those questions stayed on my phone. So I cut and pasted, and so if you read that article on the Naval Institute blog, it's just a regurgitation of the issues that I heard women sailors talking to very, very senior leaders who seem to be listening. So, hopefully there'll be some action. There's an example. There was just a fitting conference down here in Norfolk this week. Brought, a bunch of folks down to measure whoever would show up and figure out how to make women's uniforms fit better. So, there's progress there, I think.
There
But
is.
a lot of it is that empathy thing of, hey, I haven't dealt with the stuff you're dealing with. What's it like, and just stand by because you're probably going to get an earful,
Yeah. And I know there's been JT Shim who's in the comments. He's made a lot of comments, so I will go back and read some of them, but some of them were just, there's a lot to think about there. And yeah, he said female mentorship in CIA is also difficult. I think that the mentorship within the military of diversity, groups that are, more the minority are just always going to be more difficult because there's just less of us. But I think that the only thing that will change is if we even out the playing field at the highest ranks. We have to. And one. Mm-hmm.
To get the highest ranks, you have to start at the lowest ranks, right?
Yeah.
And so, your point about mentorship, Keith will kill me if I don't mention sponsorship, which is different. But sometimes you get wrapped up in the idea that I have to find a mentor that looks like me, or I have to find a protege to mentor that looks like me. And I think some of my best mentoring sessions have been with folks that didn't look like me. Sink Harris is a fantastic mentor that has been both my boss and now a model. Lisa Franchetti,
Yep.
fantastic example. So. Or reaching down, I sat down with a young African-American woman here the other day who said, I've been in for 7 years. The first time somebody's taken the time to sit down and talk to me about this stuff, I've never had a mentor, and so, we can write some book and say, you shall mentor him and her and them. But in my mind, that's part of your job, right? If you're a leader is you should spend some time mentoring people and helping them, with whatever they're dealing with. But also sponsorship is hey, have you thought about the Olmsted Scholarship? Let me show you how that works. Hey, you want to transfer communities? I met a young lieutenant today who went through the SWO community to the EDO community, right? And so there's options, there's opportunities to mentor someone every day, but you have to stop and think about more than yourself to spend that time doing it. And it always pays off. And in fact, I've been mentored by some pretty junior people. It goes the other way too. But
It does.
both of those are important. And it can't be by instruction or mandate. It has to come from the individual. To walk up and force somebody's hand. If you're a junior person and you see somebody doing something that looks interesting, hey, sir, can I buy you a cup of coffee? Or ma'am, let's talk about what you're doing. So I would just challenge any leader to take them up on that offer and don't shut the door and don't say, oh, well, I'm too busy, something like that.
I agree. Every time somebody writes me and asks questions, because I get a lot of people who write me about the public affairs community because I'm so active on social media.
Right.
So when people Google public affairs officer, Navy, especially on YouTube, I think I'm the first thing that comes up, the video I did with the Sea Cadets. And so I get a lot of, questions from people. And then I've been noticing that I think I get recommended by a lot of the recruiters. So I always make time. And if I don't have time, or if there ever came a time that I didn't have time, I'd still find someone else that I like and that, or not just like, but who I think is a good leader that could also take the time to talk to that person. Because, I just know Anthony Waite he's a coach and he's also active duty in the Navy. And he said something that really struck to me. And he goes, I know when I was in that position, that's all I wanted was someone to take the time to talk to me. And so it's your duty to take that time and make it. I mean, I'm in the middle of a move and I was still doing officer appraisals and things like that, because if someone asks me, I feel like it's my duty to make that time. I do.
That's the same thing. And that's both mentorship and sponsorship. If they're looking for them, I did the personal exchange program, which all my mentors told me not to do because it'll kill your career. But I learned another language. I met my wife. I got a BMW. That's great. And I did okay. So
I hear you.
Wrong too,
Yeah.
No.
Well, I want to go now. We've kind of covered all the different things that, because like you said, your life has been shipping sailors. I want to touch upon, and we have talked a lot about leadership, but I want to touch upon mental health. We've sort of touched upon it a little here and there, but I want to know sort of where you think the Navy stands on treating mental health issues. You saw that I got to go to a mental health summit in NAVI4, so that was really impactful.
I got to beat up my friends over there for not. I didn't know that was coming. Maybe I wasn't paying attention, but
I should have told you about it. Sorry.
To have an operational command do a mental health summit, to me, that's astounding. That would have never happened, 5 years.
It was huge.
So I should say up front, I am not a mental health expert or a psychologist or psychiatrist, but a couple thoughts. Number one, I think the more we can get past this stigma discussion and treat mental health like physical health, right? How do you maintain physical health? You work out, you eat right, you sleep. Those all contribute to mental health. But if I go up to some random person and ask them, have you ever had a physical health problem? They're going to say, right? But if I ask them, have you ever had a mental health problem? They'll be like, whoa, why do you want to know that? Right. And so when we get to the point where mental health is treated like physical health, and again, back to the proceedings, there's a great article in here. Well, let me come because after I read this quote from the young sailor, I went online and did a little searching because I had some people tell me, well, there is no scientific tie between sleep, mental health, and suicide. And so I Googled that. I actually typed that in, and I found like 4 studies that show direct correlation between sleep disorders and suicidal behavior and mental health, right? And so it's a circle. Lack of sleep causes stress, causes suicidal behavior, causes anxiety, causes lack of sleep. And so what's the Navy doing about it? Well, on the left side of that equation, you have some great stuff out there that could be better leveraged, I think. You have the Operational Stress Control Program. You have Warrior Toughness, which is kind of taught and brought to the forefront at boot camp and in the accession points, building up that resiliency, right? So that's a part of mental health, is just being able to deal with the daily stress and get past it to do your job. And then we have these folks out on some of the ships called deployment resiliency counselors that are professional, master's degree level counselors that can help get you the green side of stress, right? We have the military family counselors here at the base that are but all those folks are stretched thin. One thing we forget is those mental health counselors take that baggage home with them. They need, there needs to be enough of them to help each other. And so, and then at the far end of the spectrum is, hey, I'm mentally ill. And there's a great article in here by I'm drawing a blank on his name. It's called Bipolar General. And this was a general officer in the Navy who was bipolar, and actually his career almost ended because his boss, basically fired him. And then he went and got help and got treatment, and then continued his career and made general. And now he goes out and talks about it. And I apologize, I'm drawing a blank name. I'll find it. But at the end of the day, mental health is like physical health. How do you maintain physical health? You routine maintenance of whether it's meditation, a walk in the woods, or whatever it is that kind of keeps you sane, taking time for that, getting enough sleep. And then I think we ought to do what the SEALs do. My friend Rob Sweetman's a Navy SEAL, and they have this checkup from the neck up thing. So they go see, before their next tour, they go to I think it's a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and they get a checkup to say, hey, how are you doing? Right? Are you still mentally healthy? And so we treat mental health as if it's something we deal with when there's a crisis. And unfortunately, I think we're not in the mode yet where it's part of the routine. I'm an advocate that just like you have a physical health assessment every year, there should be a mental health. Right?
There really should. Admiral Brad Cooper was telling somebody that too, I heard.
Admiral Cooper is a huge advocate of that, and somehow, for whatever reason, kind of like me with sleep, he has yet to convince everybody that that's the way to go. Maybe he'll have some success, but he's doing some good stuff out there with it. But yeah, he's dead on, and we should be doing it. We should for a long time. You look at guys like Chris Schwartz, if you've seen that podcast or read his article, Ted Pledger. Those are two former commanding officers who are now sharing their story of almost being driven to the breaking point while they were either in command or when they came out of command. They look back and were like, holy crap, look at what I just survived. Well, guess what? If they're like that, everybody's like that. They're just brave enough to admit it and share it. And so if we ignore that, we do that at our peril. And it's unfortunate because we could lose good people. And that's where you get, some of this discussion. I had one last person that has changed some of my trajectory is Nicole Waybright. Her book, Long Way Out, talks about surviving a toxic leader, right? So, I love St. Harris, but he had a podcast the other day on Emily Bassett's Lean On Navy about how to survive a toxic work environment, right?
I saw that.
And my head almost exploded. I'm like, why are we talking about that? Why don't we get rid of the toxic person who's causing the toxic work environment? That's what we should be talking about. Why don't we have a 360 review or a peer review or some way to nip that in the bud so that either that person gets mentored and changes, or we find some other place where they can inflict themselves upon other people, but not the Navy. Because one toxic leader, Nicole, you want to talk about a gut-wrenching story, read A Long Way Out by Nicole Waybright. Holy cow. You're talking about a department head on the ship who inflicted physical injury on himself to get out from under, that command. So that's pretty extreme, but that's what happens when you have a toxic leadership environment. So how do you avoid that? You go back to the mentorship, the sponsorship, listening to people, and being empathetic, right?
Right. But what I also wonder, and this is something that, Stu Scheller and I have talked about, is I don't know how we change the toxic leadership until we change the way people get promoted. And here's what I mean by that. If your fit rep is dependent on whether or not your boss likes you, because I've seen people who didn't make an impact at all, no impact. However, their boss liked them. And because their boss liked them, they could put anything they wanted on that piece of paper and that person's going to move through the system. How do we change that for objective measures of performance based on job?
Teresa, that's a whole nother podcast, I think. If you want Google the word ducks pick ducks. There was an article that they actually put, one of these think tanks in charge of looking at the selection process in the military. And they were very critical of the Navy because they said flag officer selection boards tend to pick people that look just like them, right? And elaborate on that. They kind of inferred that it was career, but if you think about it, if I only pick people that have careers like me, I'm kind of back to that demographic where, women and minorities haven't had the opportunity to have that '04 promotion. And then so they're not '04s to make '05, to make '06, to make flag, right? So if the pool is there, but then we also have stuff, we've never had a female MCPON, gosh, I know some incredible female master chiefs out there, why is that? Back to the ducks pick ducks kind of thing, right? And so, yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did that think tank think that we should solve this issue? You said that there was
that. I'll give everybody a homework assignment. Now I've given you like 5 things to read, but maybe I don't know that they got into the, what to do about it, but
interesting.
Well, there's going to be bias, there's going to be subjectivity, and this. I've had people. I took command of Oscar Austin, and there was an officer that my predecessor thought was fantastic, and asked him to stay on as a second tour divo to fleet up. And within a month, I was like, God, this guy just is not in the right job. He's not doing what I want him to do, and I found another ship for him to go try to excel on. But 2 different leaders, same individual, very different outcome. So. It's that's a tough nut to crack. I don't know what the answer.
Because I've had the same thing happen to me. I've had a couple. Well, just one. I've had really one not less than stellar fit rep from somebody who just didn't see my potential, didn't see what I brought to the table, didn't think I was a very good PAO. And it sucks. It sucks being in that environment because it's like there's nothing you can do when your boss doesn't see your worth or doesn't value what you bring to the table. You're just.
Hey, if you have a conflict with your boss, then a personality conflict, and he has the personality, you have the conflict, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one. And the good news is in the Navy, if you wait them out, either you'll leave or they'll leave. But I'm with you. And some of those folk, they're not toxic leaders; they're just different, And you can see that, I think, as you when I was through my whole career, I kind of kept two sides of a book. One side said, this is stuff I'll never do. And one side said, this is stuff I'm going to emulate, And so both pages were filled out with stuff. But you just make those notes and you move on. And eventually it sorts itself out, I think. And, we can't all be the chief of naval operations. I'm not sure I would want to be, But you do the best you can, and you serve the sailors that you're working with and that work for you, and don't have any regrets because you didn't say what you thought or you didn't take care of that person, and don't worry about the rest. That's my thought.
I love it. Well, as we close out the podcast, I think we've covered everything that we discussed before the call that we wanted to cover. But anything else that I neglected to mention that you want to bring up?
I have a couple real quick thoughts, but I thought I'd see if there was any questions out there. I've been jabbering.
We've been talking for a while. We've had a lot of comments from JT Shim, and they're mostly comments, not necessarily questions. But I will say we do have the one gentleman, and I know somebody told me his name, but it's for some reason it keeps coming up as LinkedIn user, which is not helpful. But it says, I will say it this way: no one makes it all the way to 06 or E9 and then suddenly starts sexually harassing or become a generally toxic leader. And I would agree with that. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about before, which was the fact that a bad boss can continue to please the people above and generally abuse people, but do so in such a way that if they're generating results and they're effective, they can sometimes get a pass. And we've seen that time and time again.
Yep. There's the story of the ship that won the retention award because all the sailors re-enlisted, but then they found out they were re-enlisting for orders off the ship, right? So, it's tough because sometimes the ships, some of the folks who have been toxic leaders have the ships have performed tremendously because they just drove the crew, into the dirt to make themselves look good,
Right.
And so you have to look for that, and then we have to have a process to to maybe it has to be outside the chain of command. Maybe there has to be an evaluation or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But captain at sea has an incredible amount of power for better or for worse. And
Sure.
maybe our process, it needs to be improved to weed that out before they get selected. Maybe there's a piece of this that's the selection process, that needs to be looked at. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Anything else? Close on
well,
time.
like I said, they're mostly just comments, but JT Shim's putting a lot of comments in the feed, so we'll take a look at those later. But he said this, he said, General McChrystal said, even when the soldier self-reports that he's okay, when he returns, we should check them out. Do we skip physical checks because the sailor soldier says they're good?
No,
And
exactly. That goes to my point of just, if everything we do for physical health and apply it to mental health, that's a great start.
Mhm.
But we sailors, they get sent to their annual physical, whether they're fine or not, and then usually they find something. It's
Yeah.
the other thing is, I've been to therapy. I had a couple of sort of mental episodes and took some time off, and I found that it was incredibly healing to talk to someone who actually knows. It's funny, if you have a good therapist, you don't know you're in therapy. You just have a conversation, and they're like, "Really? Why do you think that?" And at the end of the therapy session, you're like, "Oh wow, I never thought about that before." And
Yeah.
so it I would say everybody at some point, department head, XO, CO at least, and maybe E7, 8, 9, there ought to be a mandatory mental therapy session to just kind of you know um, my friend who's a therapist, he's like, I've had general officers break down in tears in my office during a session, because we went places they'd never gone before, and so yeah, no, I agree, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, and thanks, JT Shim. Our LinkedIn user that's been commenting quite a bit is Steve Hattie, CSP ASP. So thanks so much for joining the call. And absolutely, I think that the therapy that I've utilized off and on throughout my career has been incredibly valuable. And like you said, it really is just a conversation with someone who can sometimes see things differently than you can and is skilled with understanding emotionally healthy relationships. And sometimes what I have found anyway in my past is a lot of this goes back to things that has happened in childhood that you might not have properly processed.
Oh yeah, yeah. We talk about suicide and suicidal ideation and stuff, and there's some pretty good science that says that if you have had a family member that committed suicide or a close friend, that increases your chances of taking your own life. We have so much to learn about that, and that's why those folks go to medical school. They go through to get a master's degree in counseling, is to learn how to do that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that we don't need to benefit from that knowledge. I think is kind of narcissistic. Um,
Right.
so okay, well, just a couple final thoughts, if I could. And then,
Absolutely. Floor is yours. I'll go ahead and do a solo screen. So floor is
oh,
yours, sir.
so we talked about sleep, and if I had some advice for folks, is number one, if you want to improve your life, look at your sleep. Go get a book. There's books out there. Dr. Walter, I think, Why We Sleep, tells you a lot of stuff that you can do to improve your own sleep. And then you have a responsibility for your folks. Make sure they have a chance to sleep so that they can be their best and they can be safe. Um, and uh, and so that's a piece of it. On the Manning side, like you said, you got to think out of the box. Cross qualifications. Can I get my helmsman, lee helm, and lookouts in 4 section by adding an ensign to the rotation? Sure. And that ensign will learn a lot about the people he or she's going to lead later on. Diversity, mentor somebody, find somebody, just go looking for someone. They're out there. Just grab them and say, hey, let's have a cup of coffee. Let's go have lunch. Mental health, we've already kind of talked about that. On the leadership side, I'm going to take a page from my friend Keith again. One of the things leaders do is they read. They dig into stories, biographies. They learn about people that did things that aren't like them. And then the other thing they do is they write. And so nobody's going to read your story if you don't write it. And so I think for me it's very therapeutic. I kind of stopped writing when I became a GS. I thought one of my sort of mentors said it wasn't appropriate for someone in the government to be writing articles that are publicly published, and so I listened to that. That lasted about a year, and I was going crazy. I started writing, and he was wrong, and so everybody out there, I bet, has something that you wish people would listen to you about. So write it down and send it in and get somebody to publish it, and that's how you start conversations. And if it ticks a few people off, then you have better conversations, But yeah, so that, I'm just thank you very much for having me here. I hope I gave something to somebody that was useful. I feel better anyway. So
No, it was a pleasure having you on, John. I could listen to you for hours, and I'll go to bed happy tonight and just thinking about a lot of the things you said. And I'll definitely be checking out some of the books that you mentioned, and especially the female that you spoke about who had the toxic leadership. I know she's written a book, and I've been wanting to check that one out for quite some time. And what we'll probably do is, if you want to follow up with me after this, and we'll link to some of the books and some of the recommendations that Dr. Cordle had, because I think they're worth exploring. And this has just been such an insightful conversation. I thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I'll meet you there backstage here, and I'm just going to go solo broadcast for just a moment, and but meet you backstage in just a second. But I do want to thank. So thank you so much, John.
Thank you. Have a good night.
And I want to thank all of you for watching. Great podcast tonight, as usual. So I'm very, very blessed to be giving you the opportunity to bring these guests to you. Please always continue to submit guest ideas my way. I might be traveling on the road for a little bit, so not sure when I'll do the next podcast. I kind of have to do these as they come right now, because I'm obviously in transit for our big UK move next month. But I hope you all have an amazing evening. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great night, and bye-bye now.